Hi folks, my name's Trey Hill. I wish I could be out there to talk to you about my work, but as circumstances are, I'm kind of stuck at home. So I wanted to make you a quick video and just say a few things about the work and kind of try and condense some of my ideas, why I made the things I made and why I sent the pieces I sent. So one, I want to say thanks to everybody out there at the Lux for inviting me out to do this, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure working with you all. So I'm going to kind of go back a little bit, and I'm going to just try and explain how I got to building these trees, which is mostly what I sent. For a good bit of my career, I was looking at ideas of beauty. I was looking at the way that's been portrayed in sculpture. I've been looking at ideas of attraction. I've been looking at ideas of seduction and how all those different ideas tie together. So in my studio, actually on the wall that's right behind me, I just had, this is probably maybe 8 years ago now, I had all these images up on the wall, and I was trying to look at how beauty and attraction was portrayed historically in stone sculpture. So I had all these images of historic Greek and Roman stone pieces, figurative stonework. And what I realized, I was also thinking about some other things at the time, and the things I was kind of thinking about was how there's so much in life that we don't notice, and there's so many things that we miss, and how so much of this is kind of integral to keeping our daily lives together. And what I mean by that is there's so many things that we do for each other. There's so much to our life that kind of goes unseen and unnoticed that's really kind of tied to our lives moving forward in a successful way. So that's really kind of a hard thing to fix my hair here a little bit. That's really kind of a hard thing to try and build sculpture about. And I'd been searching for a way to encapsulate these ideas of things that go unseen or unnoticed. And I'm getting back to the pictures here in a second. So anyways, I've been sitting here and I was looking at these ideas of beauty, and I had all these stone pieces on the wall. And what I noticed after they'd been on my wall for 2 weeks was a lot of them had these little trees that came up to about the thigh on the stonework. And what I realized is those pieces are there, and often there were these little trees with all the branches cut off. You could see one on Michelangelo's David, and a lot of you have seen that piece and perhaps didn't notice the little tree at the bottom. And those trees are there to support those sculptures and to keep them from breaking off at the ankles. And the trees are such a minor element, but are really so integral to the success of the piece and for it to stand. And so what I realized is sitting in front of me for the last couple of weeks was this thing that I'd been trying to find. How could I find something that kind of goes unseen yet is part of, but that is so integral to something working? So I started looking at these and I was like, God, this is kind of the thing I've been trying to track down. And it was right in front of my eyes and I didn't see it. It was that exact thing I was talking about, that something that goes unnoticed. So what I decided to do was to start using elements. It was to start taking those trees and putting them into these other pieces I was building. And at the time, the pieces I was building were more complex. They had lots of different elements in them. It was similar to some of the pieces I sent you all with the rods and the cones. And you'll see some pieces in that show that have rods and cones on them, and that's a reference to the rods and the cones in our eyes. And so I started to use just elements. I used those trees as an element within the larger piece, and I would think of them as kind of, hopefully some of those pieces that are more complex, like there's a piece that you have in the show called Separating the Rods and Cones. I think about each one of those elements kind of like a line in a poem, and so the whole thing creates the poem, and each element becomes a line. And then the more I looked at them, those trees, the more I worked on them, I thought, I wonder if these things can just stand on their own. And so I started to pare down the other elements I was adding to them, and just Then I took the object that in its original form was meant to be kind of unnoticed, and I made it the central object in the sculpture. And then I just essentially created this romance with these trees, and I kind of fell in love with them. And I just started building them, and I couldn't stop. So I've probably made, I don't know, I've made a ton of them. And I love making them, and they satisfy something for me. And they really satisfy something in my studio. They set up this challenge because there's this real formal thing that happens that is, you have to kind of resolve, you have to resolve each one in space. So they're all different, and it sets up this challenge for me, and there's something about the repetition of doing them that I feel like I've learned so much about how objects exist in space and how to create this kind of beautiful fluid form that exists in space. And it still ties back to that idea of celebrating the things that we look past and celebrating the unseen or the unnoticed. So that's where those trees come from. That's the basis of them. And then to talk a little bit about the surface, there's, I think I come to ideas really slowly, and I'm always thinking about the work, and it seems to evolve over time. And for a while I was glazing them, and I was getting these surfaces that were kind of predictable, but they didn't seem to relate with the forms. There didn't seem to be this interaction of form and surface. And I thought, I wonder, these forms seem to have all this movement. How could I get a glaze to create movement? So what's on those is an underglaze, which is a matte surface. It's not shiny. And those matte surfaces can really often be very flat and not very exciting. So what I decided to do was to try and build up, create movement with this matte surface. And that movement is often, you relate to a shiny glaze because the glaze fluxes and runs and you create this movement. So I thought, how can I do this with a dry surface? And I couldn't figure it out. I was spraying underglaze on there with the spray gun, and I was spraying water over it to try and kind of set it free and let it run. And none of that was working. And then I'd be doing this outside, and one day I went over to the sink, and this seems to be how things work for me. I had all these layers on there, and I was trying to just clean up after myself. So I started running more and more water over this. And as I'm working that surface and trying to get it off, it all kind of set free and started to run. And I thought, oh my God, this is what I'm trying to do. And it's like happening at the sink. So I regrouped and I went back outside. And what I ended up doing was I'd build these pieces and I spray them all down with a white underglaze to give myself a nice kind of crisp palette. And then I take those underglazes and I water them down a little bit. And before I do it, and then I mix them up into all these different shades. And I've got them in just essentially kind of disposable cups. So I've got them all sitting on a table next to me. Then I've got a 5-gallon bucket full of water, and I just get another bucket, and I just start dumping water all over this clay piece. So I saturate it with water. And then I start pouring different cups of underglaze over it, and I pour it. And what I absolutely love is it's the thing I've been chasing down. It's this interaction between form and surface. And by letting the material run down and interact with the form, it changes direction, it makes all these moves, and there's the connection between surface and form that I'd been trying to find. So I just pour it on, and then I pour more water, and I pour it on, I pour more water, and I'll, essentially, the whole process takes not that long, maybe an hour. But what I love about it is you can't stop. So there's something about it is once it's all wet and working, if you just keep doing this and you pour it on and then you keep pouring water over it until you get it finished and then let it all dry at once, it works. It's not really how the underglazes are made to work. So if you try and go back into it and pour water over it again, it all flakes off. So it creates this kind of wonderful experience that has to happen in a certain moment. And it creates an intensity around the glazing. It reminds me a little bit of when I used to blow glass, that you would get, you'd start and you just had to finish the piece. So there's something to that I really like, because it kind of marks this little moment in time, as opposed to the way I build the other piece. When I build the pieces, it stretches out over months, whereas this happens within an hour. And another thing that happens, if you pour too much water over it, it kind of does the same thing. So it's this real fine balance that you just get to work with what the material will do, and the interaction between underglaze and the clay I find very appealing. And I think sometimes that when I'm thinking about surfaces, I think there's some surfaces that feel like they're just on the surface. And then there's times where I feel like the surface and the form are kind of enveloped with each other, and they're holding hands, or there's this embrace. And by the form dictating what the surface does, I think it achieves that in a really kind of wonderful way. So that's how I've worked those surfaces onto there. There's a few pieces I'm thinking about the work that I sent you all. There's some pieces, a lot of them have different bases on them. Some have a steel base, some have a lead base. I really enjoy working other materials into the objects, even if it's in kind of a traditional way. Like one of the pedestals one of the bases feels like kind of a straightforward steel pedestal. But I love the way clay works with other materials, and the way the steel can make that pink on that piece really pop, or the way the lead works with that black and white piece called Breathe that I sent you all. I think that using different materials sets up different challenges for the work, but I think it's because often there's a conflict there, but I think there can also be this really wonderful harmony that happens, and that's something that I'm always working on. There's also another piece with a marble base on it that's, and I love that kind of contradiction with the clay that feels so soft, and that piece especially has this really soft touch to it next to the hard stone, but then I tried to soften the edges of that stone to relate it back to the softness of the piece. So those are some kind of highlights. This is a little hard to do since I'm not sitting there looking at the work, but those are some highlights of, maybe where that work came from, how I thought about it, a little bit of process. And I guess I'd also just like to say, if as the viewer, if you all are looking at the work and there's questions that you have about it, and you'd like to reach out to me, please feel free to do that. The folks at the gallery know a lot about the work, so they could answer any questions that you have. But, it's always refreshing to me when people take the time to ask something. So please feel free to reach out. I'm sure that they could help you get my contact information if you'd like to send me an email, or if you have any questions about the work, because it means a lot when people spend the time to do that. So again, thank you everyone at the Lux, and thank you all viewers for taking the time to listen to this and to look at the work and to care enough to listen. So, all right, thank you all, and I hope this was helpful. See ya.